All right, everybody. Welcome to episode 37 of Now Showing with Mike and Wayne. 37 straight weeks of this podcast, and we love it. We're having a great time with it. This week, we are going to discuss 80s comedies, just kind of as a overall topic. We're not going to really settle on some of our favorites. We're just going to talk about them, kind of where it started. Wayne, so one thing I wanted to talk about where it kind of begins is 1980. You get Stripes, you get Caddyshack, either 79 or 80. Meatballs was like 79. So some of these movies came out in the 70s, but they're still part of that 80s culture. Like Meatballs definitely started the whole camp culture of the 80s, which I think is important to talk about. And, and it introduced everybody to Bill Murray for the most part, with the exception, obviously, he was on SNL like a year or two before, but it introduced everyone to Bill Murray, the movie star.
Yes, indeed. I've got my reminiscing pants on, and I cannot wait to jump into this topic.
So, as I talked about, in the late 70s, early 80s, we got to some of these kind of camp movies, these 80s comedies. Bringing up Meatballs for a second, like I said, I know it's technically in the 70s, but it really is an 80s film, I think. Just as I look as a horror fan, Halloween came out in 1978, but it really started the 80s horror boom. So with Meatballs, I want to talk about that one real quick, just because it did start this camp movie thing that we got in the 80s, where it was either whether it was a horror movie or it was a bunch of 80s frat boys at a summer camp picking on nerds. It started this whole genre itself. And just kind of talk about the people behind that. Obviously, like I said, it was Bill Murray. Ivan Reitman was the director. Harold Ramis was one of the writers on Meatballs. So right there, you've got the pedigree of a bunch of these movies. Ivan Reitman, who did obviously Ghostbusters. Harold Ramis, who wrote, I don't know, about 80% of the movies we're going to talk about today. And Bill Murray, who starred in quite a few of them. So it just, I think Meatballs, people don't necessarily bring that up as a Bill Murray classic, but it started his likability, if you will. It started his sarcasm that we all kind of come to know and love, his wit, if you will. And I encourage people to go back and revisit Meatballs and enjoy it for what it is, and being basically like the first zany camp counselor movie, because it was a lot of fun. When I saw it for the first time, probably like in 2000, when it finally hit DVD. But it's a great movie. It's really funny, and like I said, it's kind of the beginning of what we're talking about. And then we go ahead. So we've already kind of talked at length about Caddyshack, Wayne. We love Caddyshack here at the show. We love Stripes. We talked about both of those movies. One that I wanted to talk about that kind of takes that kind of humor, that 80s humor, but then puts it into a coming-of-age high school movie. It was the beginning in the 80s, was Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yes.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High, directed by Amy Heckerling, based on the novel by Cameron, or the novel / screenplay by Cameron Crowe. Obviously, people know him, Almost Famous, bunch of other stuff. Say Anything. Introduced the world to Sean Penn, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Judge Reinhold, Phoebe Cates. Had Ray Walston in as the teacher in Sean Penn's class. Spicoli obviously has become a character synonymous with the 80s. One of the greatest characters, I think, from the 80s. And it resonates with, today. I mean, there's just so many Spicoliisms in the world, and Spicoli has just been one of those characters that, as someone as me, as a non-stoner, was always like drawn to, because he was just such a fun character for Sean Penn to play with. It was the beginning of Sean Penn's long career. There was a lot of casting issues with this movie in the beginning. Apparently he auditioned twice, and the first time he came in, he was like really nervous and didn't know if he was going to get it. Like, they had him go back out, and then he comes back in, and he took the shirt off scene in front of everybody, and they're like, that's it. This is the guy. This is him. This is Spicoli. And he nailed it. And it's such a great movie. It's a great coming-of-age story, but it does have that 80s comedy vibe to it. And it stands out as one of the better movies, I think, from that we're going to be talking about. And there's a couple different type of 80s comedies, but they all kind of have that same feel to it. And this one, I think, had that same feel as a lot of the other movies we're going to talk about. Wayne, what are your memories of Fast Times?
Man, I'm going to go straight to the soundtrack. An epic soundtrack for just, rock tunes and just...
You got Somebody's Baby on there, Waffle Stomp by Joe Walsh, Love Rules by Don Henley, Uptown Boys by Louis Goffin. Just a lot of great music in that one, which makes sense knowing Cameron Crowe's background and Amy Heckerling too. I mean, another one of hers, Clueless, had a lot of great 90s music in it. So her movies kind of have that. The music kind of helps tell that story, I think. And it definitely fits perfectly for something like Fast Times.
Now, the Phoebe Cates pool scene is, it's one of those widely replicated and spoofed,
Yes, iconic.
Iconic, of course. I didn't actually see the actual clip, because I wasn't allowed to see this until, my mid-teens.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think my parents wanted to see me then, but after seeing, so many spoofs of it, to actually see the actual iconic scene, it's like, oh, I get it now. Sticks out, when they're going back to the music really quick, when, Damone tells Mark to, just play Zeppelin 4.
Yeah.
Just that whole thing, and...
Well, it's such a great young cast, too. You got Forrest Whitaker, Kelly Maroney, Eric Stoltz, and Anthony Edwards played the other two stoners with Spicoli at the table when he takes his shirt off. And then you have Reinhold goes up to him to put his shirt back on. James Russo, who's a big friend of Johnny Depp's, he's in that one. Nicolas Cage, obviously, is the plays.
He's credited in
Nicolas Coppola, one of his only movies credited as a Coppola. He plays one of Brad's friends that works in the fryer in the restaurant. Just such a great supporting cast of people that weren't famous at the time that have now all, for the most part, become super famous. It's just a really fun, great coming-of-age story of what it was like to kind of grow up in high school. And I think with these coming-of-age stories, they resonate to everybody. And I'm stealing this from somewhere else that I read, because we're always coming of age. Every point in our life, we're always growing into something else and what we're going to be next in our life, whether it's a different person or just a more wiser person, whatever it is. So that's why these all resonate. Any ones that were made in the 70s and 80s resonate with the same ones that were made in the last couple years. And that's why I think people like us, we kind of like these movies, because it's about people growing, whether it's about high school kids growing or junior high kids or whatever. We're all kind of growing throughout life. And I think that's why this movie I hold this movie a little bit higher than probably a lot of the other movies we're going to talk about today, because there is some more sentimental value to it. And right. I always look at coming of age stories as being a little bit smarter than your average comedy. And I think this just hits that on a lot of targets, a lot of hits, moments and stuff, and a lot of scenes too.
Touching back real quick, when we talked about Eric Stoltz, he was the original Marty McFly in the Back to the Future.
He was. They shot this year, started shooting with him. And he just didn't have that chemistry with the rest of the cast. And it was nothing. I don't think they wanted, they liked him. It wasn't right for the movie. And so they recast him with, obviously, Michael J. Fox. And the rest is history on that one. And he had a great career. Still, I almost said James Spader. Eric Stoltz is still working today. But, obviously he worked a lot more in the 80s and 90s. All right, so the next one that I wrote just a list here of movies to talk about here. So Wayne, if you got any two you want to jump in on or you want to talk something, but I figure one of the main topics of today is going to be Eddie Murphy, and you'll see why when we come up towards later in the show. His career basically took off, if you will, not started necessarily, but took off with Beverly Hills Cop, which came out in the 80s, and introduced the world to Axel Foley, and took that same comedy style of the 80s, but then threw it into an action film. So it's basically like say you're taking his character from Trading Places and then throwing him in an action film, and it worked perfectly. This movie originally was actually meant for Sylvester Stallone. It was going to be more of an action piece instead of an action comedy. that fell through, and Eddie Murphy ended up taking the role. And the rest is history, because 3 movies later, we're possibly getting a 4th one, maybe going to Netflix at some point in the near future. So it's been a franchise kind of in his history. When you talk about Eddie Murphy, Beverly Hills Cop is definitely one of the first movies that comes up. It's one of my favorite cop films. I love cop films. I love comedies. So this is one that I go to often. Rewatchability on this movie is ridiculous. The cast is fantastic. Judge Reinhold from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. John Ashton, who people remember him from Gone Baby Gone, and the Eric Stoltz movie that I love so much that I talked about that I'm drawing a blank on at the moment.
James Russo, also from Fast Times.
James Russo, yes, he plays Axel's best friend that's in From Out of Town.
One of my favorite villains, Ronnie Cox.
Not a villain in this one. One of his rare non-villain roles. Right. Ronnie Cox, who would go on to be a villain in Dexter years later. And obviously the villain for RoboCop and many other movies. But yes, he was. It's always fun to watch RoboCop. It's like a good combo or movie night would be RoboCop and Beverly Hills Cop, because you get to see him play one of the most evilest villains of the 80s, and then play like one of the nicest cops. Even add in Beverly Hills Cop 2, where he actually gets wounded, and they basically go to California to help rescue or like find out why someone tried to kill him. Right. So, just a great movie. It's directed by Martin Brest, produced by Simpson and Bruckheimer. Obviously, those guys are big blockbuster producers. Simpson unfortunately passed away in the 90s, but Bruckheimer is still working today. This has always been one of my favorite 80s movies, and the music is another thing. Like it's totally 80s. You can't watch this movie and not think about the 80s.
Axel Foley's theme is one of my ringtones.
Yep. The jacket he wears the whole time is fantastic. The bananas in the tailpipe. I mean, come on, that's classic now. That's been redone a million times. If you've ever seen the Jay and Silent Bob cartoon from years ago, Judge Reinhold played a character on that cartoon show called Judge Reinhold, where he was an actual judge, and he has a fantasy about him and Axel running around and putting bananas in people's tailpipes. Pretty hilarious. Different, obviously, type of comedy, but it's funny to see that, like, Judge Reinhold still getting that callback years later.
Banks of Breaking Bad and other Breaking Bad things, was the character of Zach in this movie. Always loved to see Mike Ehrmantraut and things from before Breaking Bad.
He was always, in the 80s, he always played henchman. Yeah. That was, so when I saw Breaking Bad, I'm like, oh my god, that dude is every henchman ever in every 80s movie. And
I bet he's a henchman in this. Surprise, surprise.
Yes,
kinda.
Exactly. He's one of the guys that's sent to take care of James Russo's character, and he knocks Axel Foley unconscious. Just a fantastic movie. If you haven't seen Beverly Hills Cop, I think it's on like Netflix or Amazon right now. I love that movie. Quintessential 80s flick. Eddie Murphy at the top of his career. Like I said, basically the beginning of his career.
I didn't realize that Bronson Pritchett was in this movie. We got to see extra Balky.
Yes, yep. Yeah, he's in the first, he might even be in all 3 of them. He's definitely in the first 2, though. So he plays like this art dealer, I think, that he has to deal with. It's really good. He's a really good role. It's just, like I said, it has everything. It has action, it has suspense, it has comedy. Just, as it says here on Wikipedia, shot Murphy to international stardom. Won the People's Choice Award for Favorite Motion Picture, was nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy, and Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. So not only did this movie get a lot of love from fans, it got a lot of love from Hollywood, and it really set Murphy up for the next 20 years until he kind of took some time off for a little while. But it really was the start of his career. It was 1984, so it was before basically any of his other big movies. He took this instead of Ghostbusters. He was supposed to be in Ghostbusters. Would have been a completely different movie, I think. I don't know. I probably still would have liked it, but it would have been different. The sad thing is that once Eddie Murphy dropped out, Winston's role got reduced greatly because they did not have a big character or big actor big name to put in the role. They cast Ernie Hudson, who was not that famous back in 1984. So he did kind of maybe ruin that character a little bit, but I would say Ernie Hudson was able to make that character his own, and Winston has become a great character. We're not really going to talk about Ghostbusters either because we talked about the movie just a ton. But go ahead.
I really want to debate that though. At some point, we'll have to do a back our head around, because I would have loved to have seen Eddie Murphy in this movie with Harold Ramis
and Dan Aykroyd. The only thing is I don't know if that meant, because Bill Murray, everybody knows that Bill Murray basically replaced John Belushi. And so it's very possible that Eddie Murphy was going to be even, I'd have to watch the thing again they had on Netflix. He may have even been like before Bill Murray was attached. So there's possible that Bill Murray's role got beefed up because Eddie Murphy dropped out. I'm not quite sure about that.
Interesting.
But that would have been great, yeah, having those four. I mean, I think it would have been something special. It just would have been a different movie, I think, because Eddie Murphy's comedy is a little different than obviously Ernie Hudson, who's an actor, where Eddie Murphy's coming from stand-up comedy. So would have been interesting, to say the least. All right, so moving on. Beverly Hills Cop, classic, watch it. What else I got here? Just some other ones that, we've talked maybe a little bit about. The Great Outdoors. The Great Outdoors with Dan Aykroyd, John Candy. Always been one of my personal favorite 80s films. Just the physical comedy, obviously, and the comedy chops of both Aykroyd and Candy at this point in their life. Directed by Howard Deutsch, and stars Dan Aykroyd, John Candy, Stephen Faracy, and Annette Bening in her film debut. So it gave us it started the career of Annette Bening. Just the loudmouth Aykroyd and the kind of quiet John Candy. Just a lot of fun. Written by John Hughes. I've always loved this movie. We talked a little bit about this when we talked about John Candy. But this movie has just always been one of those ones that when I think 80s comedies, I think of this style of movie too. Great Outdoors is just it's a fun movie about family and traveling and vacations and bears and surviving a bear attack, which is probably one of the greatest parts of the movie. So then we transition next to another.
One before we leave, my favorite line. You know what's in hot dogs, don't you? Listen, assholes.
It's a great line. It's a great movie. People should see it. We're going to transition next to Ferris Bueller's Day Off, another different type of comedy from the 80s. But again, has that 80s feel. And this is what I'm talking about this week. This is where I want us to kind of focus on, is movies that have that 80s feel to them, that are comedies. So Ferris Bueller's Day Off, directed by John Hughes, written by John Hughes, starring Matthew Broderick, Mia Sara, and Alan Ruck, is the story of Ferris, who doesn't want to go to school because he's a teenager in high school, and he calls in sick. And then he goes and he picks up his girlfriend and his best friend, and they kind of go out on a all-day adventure, if you will, while being chased down by the principal, played by Jeffrey Jones, Ed Rooney, Principal Rooney. Also stars Jennifer Grey as Jeannie Bueller, Charlie Sheen as Boy in Police Station, kind of a riff on his Major League character almost. That's what I think of when I see this movie.
Supposedly they thought that is Rick Vaughn in the police station.
Is that who? Okay, all right.
Well, they try to loosely tie it together. I'm like, works for me. Let's do it.
Sounds good. I think people remember this movie for a lot of different reasons. One being the big scene in Chicago where they're part of the parade, and Ferris is singing and dancing. It's a really fun movie. It's definitely it's definitely up there at the top of the 80s comedies. I'm trying to think of what it is with the 80s comedies. They just had more like this free will thing, like this free this freeing of being able to do whatever they wanted type of comedy. That makes sense. Huh?
Free of consequence.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it was. It was the free of consequence comedies back in the 80s where, like, in the 90s and 2000s, we brought the consequences in, and, like, that's what made it funny, is that people would do what they wanted, and then they would get punished for it, or they would fall down and hurt themselves, that kind of stuff. The 80s, you're right, it had that more freeing to it. Go ahead, Wayne.
Obviously, this one has special, place in my heart just because it's in Chicago.
Yep.
In the Illinois Chicagoland area. When they take the car, I know Ferris has got this long drawn out thing about what type of car it is. I don't remember it. I'm not a car guy, but or maybe it was Cameron. One of them says that type of thing, and then you see him take it, go and park it in a parking garage, and you got Richard Edson, as a attendant, and Larry Flash Jenkins, the other co-pilot who steal the car and go joyride.
Yeah.
At the epic Star Wars thing, it's just flying over the bump.
No, it was good.
Just one of my favorite scenes, obviously. Who is the sausage king of the Midwest? What's his name?
Abe Froman.
Abe Froman.
Abe Froman, the sausage king of Chicago. It also, I think, it hits reality at the end when Cameron gives that speech to Ferris. And I think that hits the kind of the emotional button on the movie where, not everything's hunky-dory. Just because your life is PG King, not everybody's living in the same world that you're living in every day.
Pal.
Huh?
I'll see you later, pal.
Yeah. So...
Bueller, you're my hero. Let's not forget Ben Stein.
Oh, yeah, Ben Stein, yeah. Bueller. Anyone? Bueller. It's just, again, it's another movie that's made its way into the lexicon of the way we talk, the way we see things. It's ingrained itself in society, and it will forever be one of those movies that has done that. And that's kind of cool when you when you could look at the 80s and you can look at Fast Times, Ghostbusters, Beverly Hills Cop, Ferris Bueller, and you could see the impact that they've had on society. I think that itself is pretty cool. All right, so we're moving on here. Just a couple more I wanted to talk about. Some lesser known ones I want to bring up. We don't really need to go into detail about them, but Real Genius with Val Kilmer. Always been one of my favorites. I've always been a Val Kilmer fan. That one, he plays a genius who goes to this school, but he's like a slacker genius. And so they end up going up against the dean of the college, and just lots of crazy stuff ensues. It's one of those just weird 80 comedies. It's kind of similar to something like Weird Science. Better Off Dead as another odd one with John Cusack. If anyone hasn't seen that one, I want my $2. There's so many good scenes in that movie too. One I want to mention that's not necessarily a comedy, but it is a quintessential 80s movie for me, and it's The Legend of Billie Jean. It's more of a drama with some comedy elements in it. It stars Helen Slater from Supergirl, Keith Gordon, Christian Slater, Peter Coyote. It's just a great 80s flick. It doesn't get talked about enough. I see every once in a while, I'll see on Twitter someone like, oh my God, we need to talk about Legend of Billie Jean more. And I agree. It's very much a woman empowerment movie. Ugh. God, I can't speak. It's very much a woman empowerment movie that I think deserves to be seen. And Helen Slater gives a fantastic performance. No relation to Christian Slater. They play brother and sister in this movie. I'm a huge Christian Slater fan. People know that by now, probably. So this is just another movie of his that I like to watch often. And it reminds me of the 80s. And, it kind of, for you and me, Wayne, we were kind of young in the 80s. So these movies kind of give us a window into what it was like to be a teenager in the 80s, because we were not teenagers in the 80s. We were teenagers in the 90s and the early 2000s. So these movies, I think, do that for us, as they kind of open it up for us a little more. And we're probably the last generation that's going to kind of really be fond of these movies, I think. But I think the more we talk about them, the more people want to go and revisit them. So maybe they'll end up liking them.
It breaks my heart that my son doesn't love Ghostbusters the way I do.
I know.
I do.
Trust me. No son. Donovan's no son of mine.
Of course, I love me some Keith Gordon, obviously.
Yes.
And other movies that he's been in.
Christine. Yep, he's in Christine. He's in. He directed a bunch of episodes of Dexter. I want to say, actually.
Really?
He's turned into a TV director, and he has kind of got away from doing in front of the camera stuff. Yeah, from 2006 to 2010, he directed a handful of Dexter episodes. Yeah, Keith Gordon, a lot of fun. Obviously, what was the school movie? Back to School, right?
That's what I was going to transition right into.
Back to School, another classic 80s flick. Has that same kind of 80s feel to it. The freedom to do what you want. Starring Rodney Dangerfield, Keith Gordon, Sally Kellerman, Burt Young, Terry Farrell, William Zabka, who we love here at the show, star of the Karate Kid series and Cobra Kai. Ned Beatty, Sam Kinison, Paxton Whitehead, and of course Robert Downey Jr. in one of his very early roles, directed by Alan Metter. Back to School, produced by Chuck Russell, written by Stephen Campman, Will Porter, Peter Torokove, and again Harold frickin' Ramis. So yep. Harold Ramis, Ivan Reitman, John Landis, Joe Dante, those guys have their fingerprints all over the 80s. They're basically like, and obviously John Hughes. Sorry, I forgot John Hughes. If I don't mention, we have already mentioned him like 5 times because he's only written or directed half the movies we just talked about. But yeah, so like those guys had their fingerprints on this style of 80s movies. I'm not talking Spielberg and Lucas and Zemeckis. Obviously, Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, huge movies of the 80s, but different kind of movies from the 80s. So these ones that we're talking about today, again, have that same kind of just comedy feel to it. Back to School, just another one. I probably saw it, obviously much older than when it came out, because I was 3 when it came out. I saw it probably late 90s, early 2000s, and I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. Like, I was kind of like, why had I not seen this movie before? Because it's that good. And it's just, Rodney Dangerfield is fantastic in it. And the whole diving aspect of it is hilarious, where he was the diver that the teacher saw long ago pull off the triple Lindy at the show. It's just such a great movie. It has that great comedy feel. Like Zabka plays the douchebag, of course, because that's the role that he was apparently born to play. Where Keith Gordon is the kind of nerdy dude, but he's kind of cool. But Robert Downey Jr. plays the super nerd, making him still pretty nerdy. So I guess Jr. plays that role. Downey plays that role because they want Gordon to be like the front and center, like hunk, I guess, kind of. So you have to have someone who's a little nerdier than him. Hey, hunkish. You know, Keith Gordon was in good shape back in the 1980s. That's all I'm saying, you know.
You have to be to rock that Speedo, man.
Exactly. I guess that's what I'm saying. Like, in order to look good in the bathing suit, he had to be able to be a little shredded, right? But this movie, stop talking about Keith Gordon's shredded bod right now. Burt Young and Rodney Dangerfield together were fantastic in this movie. Robert Downey Jr. was hilarious as the nerdy sidekick, as he would be in quite a few of these movies back in the 80s. Just Wayne, I'll let you talk a little more about this movie. I know you love this film.
Yes. I'm going right to Sam Kinison in the cameo that he makes as the history professor.
Mm-hmm.
Good answer. I'm going to keep my eye on you. Oh, I just love Sam Kinison and for all of his crass, just... Hello, dog. Go away. Dog just burst through the door. Yeah, it's just Sam Kinison with his crass, just, you know, his comedy. If you're, another just tribute from the 80s, just his stand-up comedy was just something that nobody had ever really seen before. Just with this brash, crass honesty about things. And obviously, it's just a short 1-2 scenes in the movie.
Yeah. It's such a short career for him, too. I mean...
Yeah. Killed in a car accident after sobering up and kicking his drug habit. Just tragic. Yep. Kurt Vonnegut playing himself, who Rodney Dangerfield hires to write a paper about himself.
So strange to have like that cameo.
E. Emmett Walsh, the Coach Turnbull. He's the one that asks about Triple Lindy. It's like, I grew up on that pier.
Yeah, Emmett Walsh. Yeah, he is a great character actor, and it's very rare sometimes that you get to see actors of his caliber play around in a movie like this. So it was fun to kind of see him in a comedy, especially the same year I think Blood Simple came out, which was a very much darker movie.
Lou might lose his trigger finger. So many one-liners, classic Rodney. I mean, obviously you talk about, Diane, meet my nieces. Paxton Whitehead is Philip, Professor Bobby.
Yeah.
I can go on and on. I'm sure we have already talked about this. I know I've talked about this at length already. So just, classic 80s comedy with no consequences, as we've already discussed. And everybody wins in the end. So, hey.
Yes. Before we get into one of our final movies, I want to talk about Weird Science. It's a movie that I brought up already, directed by John Hughes. Again, written by John Hughes. Obviously, John Hughes was huge in the 80s. I don't talk as much about The Breakfast Club and some of those other films. They haven't aged very well. I wasn't a fan of them, most of them, the first time I saw them, so that's why I don't personally bring them up. Wayne can feel free to talk about them if he would like. But I just... not a big fan of those. I like a lot of other John Hughes movies, and Weird Science is one of those films. A great cast, again, Anthony Michael Hall, Ellen Mitchell-Smith, Kelly LeBrock. That's just the tip of the iceberg, because we got my man Bill Paxton as Chet Donnelly. Bill Paxton is fantastic in this movie as brother Chet, who gets turned into like...
that role specifically, it's like, that's Bill Paxton?
Yep. Robert Downey Jr. again. He's in this one. He went from being a nerd to a bully, or being a bully to a nerd, because I think this is actually the year before.
This was 85 the year before, so yes, you are correct. Bully to a nerd.
Michael Berryman.
Spectrum of ability.
Yes, Michael Berryman is an actor from The Hills Have Eyes, the original Hills Have Eyes. He's known because he has the disease, something along the lines of alopecia, where he can't grow body hair. So he's cast. Huh?
Alopecia?
Alopecia. I think that's right. So he's always cast as like these weird looking characters because he kind of looks weird. And so it was great to see him in this movie. I probably had seen Weird Science before I saw Hills Have Eyes, but then having watched Weird Science after Hills Have Eyes, it's kind of like, oh, it's nice to see him in a role in a like kind of a comedy film. So this movie is these two nerds who want to lose their virginity, and they end up very, very loosely through actual science end up creating a woman who then comes to life, played by the lovely Kelly LeBrock. And she kind of gives them a new attitude. And it's funny because it's a movie about men creating a woman that looks like how they want. However, she doesn't act like how they expect her to act. She's a very powerful woman. She's very much teaches them kind of how to behave towards women and how to behave right and be nice people instead of being the pervy miscreants that they were when they created her. So it kind of has that little twist to it, which not all these 80s movies did. A lot of these 80s movies were very sexist towards women. This one, I think, like I said, I think the premise is, but they kind of turn it on its head within the movie. And I think that ends up working, at least for me. Now, I'm a guy speaking from my own male perspective. So, but it's a very funny movie. The scenes with the bikers coming through and the party and stuff and the bullies. And it's just, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Lots of good scenes. Like I said, Bill Paxton is fantastic as the brother. He ends up turning into this giant like blob by the end of the movie. It's just a really fun 80s flick. And one of my favorite John Hughes movies that, like I said, I'm not a big fan of some of the other ones he's done, but this one I did like a lot.
Well, I'm going to go over, some of the other movies from the 80s. You got 16 Candles, you got Pretty in Pink, but yeah, The Breakfast Club. I'm probably the most familiar with this one. I had to do a report on it in high school. I remember watching the five individuals and, from the different, socio cliques, if you will, and how they all kind of respected each other at the end a little bit. Again, we're just talking about lack of consequences, but, they're all in the detention on Saturday because of consequences and things they did. And how they, escaped the detention hall to go to the gym and just spending a Saturday detention. It's like, and I don't know if you've ever had a Saturday detention or anything like that. I don't know if they even existed at my school, because who wanted to give up their Saturday to punish kids? Because it's more really a punishment for the teacher, too.
No, yeah, I never had a Saturday. I had it in school, and I think that was it. I don't think I never had a Saturday.
I played football, so I got away with anything I wanted. So, classic, jock privilege, I guess. And not that I'm proud of bragging about it. It's just,
so you were Emilio Estevez, is what you're saying?
Yes, but I didn't, wax their or put tape on anybody's backside to wax them. So I was the anti-jock. I got along with everybody. Well, sort of. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, I don't really, I bring up The Breakfast Club because it's, 1985, and it's well received and well renowned, but it doesn't do anything that, I don't know. I say that I like it, but it's not something that I'm going to revisit anytime in the near future, just because I need to watch The Breakfast Club. It made a statement, and it ends well, and everybody's happy. It's a typical 80s movie.
Yeah, I mean, with a lot of these 80s films, even some of the ones that we've already previously talked about, there's a lot of problematic things in them. I know, for instance, that Breakfast Club has quite a few. 16 Candles has quite a few. It was just a different time, and I think for me, when I saw these movies, I was already older, and it didn't resonate with me maybe as much as it would have if I was younger. Breakfast Club, especially because everyone told me how hilarious it was, and it's really more of a drama than a comedy, in my opinion. So when I watched it and I didn't really laugh that much, I was like, this movie's not very funny. But that's just me. Everybody else, most other people like this movie, so I have nothing against people liking this movie. I'm just not a big fan of Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, the Brat Pack movies. I tried to. I like a lot of the actors in other things. I just never really got into these movies when they came out.
Yeah, the biggest takeaway from this one is the letter at the end that they wrote to, what is it, the vice principal or
the dean, I think, right? Isn't he the dean?
Yes, thank you. It's like, that's the most iconic thing.
Well, and the arm up by Judd Nelson at the end. I mean, that's another thing that's been done over and over again.
Thank you, Family Guy.
Yes. Simpsons probably did it better.
They did it first, for sure.
Yeah. This is true. All right, so we're going to move on into our last movie of the 80s that we're going to talk about before we get into our next segment, and that is 1988's Coming to America, directed by John Landis, starring Eddie Murphy, Arsenio Hall, James Earl Jones, John Amos, Madge Sinclair, Sherry Headley. Let's see, I know there were other people. Louis Anderson, Eric LaSalle as Daryl Jenks, the man with the soul glow. Frankie Faison, Vanessa Bell, Jake Steinfeld, Calvin Lockhart, and of course Samuel L. Jackson in an early role as the hold-up man and armed robber at McDowell's, which is what he's credited on his Wikipedia.
Right. Don't forget Cuba Gooding Jr. is the boy getting haircuts.
Yes, Cuba getting his haircut in the seat. Okay, so in 1988, this movie hit, and music by Nile Rodgers, screenplay by David Sheffield, Barry W. Blaustein, Story by Eddie Murphy, though. Eddie Murphy was hot at this point, as we talked about. Beverly Hills Cop set him on a trajectory that most people were looking for back in the 80s, and he could basically do no wrong. And in 1988 came Coming to America. It's about Prince Akeem from Zamunda, and he comes to America searching for a bride because he was had an arranged marriage that he didn't want to be a part of. And so he kind of comes to America to sow his oats, see what's, good for him. Ends up falling in love. Comedy ensues. Lots of funny characters throughout this movie. You have Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall playing many different characters throughout this film, hilariously and very funny. You get the great James Earl Jones in this kind of goofy comedy. This movie reminds me of it's almost like a spoof movie, similar to like something like, obviously similar to like Nutty Professor, but it's spoof because it knows what it is and it's very tongue-in-cheek, and the audience is very much in on the joke. And there's a lot of looking to the camera. There's just a lot of like jokes that everybody's supposed to be in on, and it's just a classic. I mean, I've seen this movie probably a dozen times, if not more. It does tie in the Dukes from Trading Places at the end of it, which I thought was always... It kind of puts those two universes together, Trading Places and Coming to America, both directed by John Landis, which apparently recently Eddie Murphy talked about, and even at the time, him and John Landis did not get along. So there was a tough relationship between the two of them, even though they worked on 3 movies together all the way to 94's Beverly Hills Cop 3. So why they kept working together and not liking each other, I don't know. But apparently they saw things differently. So this movie has always been a kind of the quintessential 80s comedy to me. I laugh every time I watch it. The characters are still funny to this day. It really just kind of hits every beat, I think. And Murphy and Arsenio Hall are great. They're hilarious in this. I don't think Arsenio Hall is necessarily a great actor, but he's great at playing these different characters, I think, which really worked for this movie. Wayne, what are your initial thoughts on the first Coming to America?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I really, really wanted to rewatch that this week, and I just didn't get a chance. So I'm definitely going to find some time to rewatch that, hopefully this afternoon even. Just the classic, "Good morning, neighbors! Hey, yes, you too!" Edited for younger ears who may be listening.
Yes. There's so many great one-liners.
Yeah. I actually was thinking, because like with James Earl Jones as King Jaffe Jafar, it's like I wonder if that's what led him to be cast as Mufasa in The Lion King.
Maybe.
I mean, not too much of a stretch on that one, but who knows? Just the old classic, just with all the different characters, and that's what you're going to get with every Eddie Murphy movie. He's going to give you more than one character in something. I mean, you've got the Nutty Professor, Norbit, stuff like that, where he's just got these bit characters that he uses. Very much in the way of Diary of a Mad Black Woman and
most of Tyler Perry.
Tyler Perry, thank you. No, forgive me, sorry, Tyler.
Medea, all the Medea stuff, yeah. Very similar to that. I mean, you get obviously he did it too in Bowfinger, where he played, that was less makeup because he just played basically the same person, but one was kind of a doofus and the other one wasn't. He made a career out of doing this, and it was a successful career for quite some time. And we loved him for it, and we still do, I think. He created some of the best characters while doing this. I mean, he even used it like a Nutty Professor, like he dressed up. Obviously, he was in the makeup and stuff, but remember when he was himself, too, at one point, when he was the sexy Nutty Professor. He was just Eddie Murphy, which was fun to see him kind of play off his own assholeness, I guess, if you will.
Mean,
yeah. But yeah, I mean, Coming to America is just a classic 80s comedy, and you can't really do much better. I don't think it's one of my favorites, definitely, out of the 80s. So many good one-liners, like I said before. Another interesting thing too, because Arsenio and Eddie have obviously with the sequel been doing a lot of talking. They were forced to cast one white person in the movie by Paramount, which is interesting when you hear like forced. They got a list of names, and Louis was actually on that list, and they knew him just as comedians. They knew who Louis Anderson was, and they're like, "Oh, I'd like to work with Louis." So that's why they cast him, and it worked out really well. He works at the McDowell's with them when they're working there. Just a fun movie. Great to see Samuel L. Jackson as the man who's trying to rob them at the McDowell's and then gets taken down by Akeem. Like I said, lots of fun stuff. Very inappropriate because the first one is rated R. It's not super inappropriate or anything. There isn't a lot of hard language or anything. There's a little bit of nudity, a little bit of sexual things happen, but nothing major. Just still a fun movie, which then leads us into, it's a terrible segue, but we're going to go anyway. Leads us into the review
of the week.
And this week we are, of course, doing Coming to the number America. So Coming to America, or Coming to America 2, however you want to call it. Whatever. It was purchased by Paramount, produced by Paramount, and then purchased by Amazon. And it stars a lot of the original cast, and that is Eddie Murphy, Arsenio Hall are back, James Earl Jones is back, Sherry Headley, who is the main actress in the first movie, returns. Leslie Jones is a new addition. Jermaine Fowler is a new main character. Tracy Morgan. My personal favorite new addition, Wesley Snipes, and directed by Craig Brewer, who did the Dolomite movie with Eddie Murphy like 2 years ago now, which is great. If you haven't seen it, definitely go check out Dolomite Is My Name, I believe is what it's called. So this movie takes place 30 years later. Paramount produced it. They sold it to Amazon for $125 million, I want to say. And Akeem is back. He is still Prince. Spoiler alert, he does become king at some point. How that happens is actually quite hilarious, I thought. So then he finds out he has a male heir, played by Jermaine Fowler from New York, from one of his moments that he doesn't remember having sex with Leslie Jones's character, and a baby was born. So he is now the true heir. Huh?
A warthog or whatever he describes her as.
Yeah. So he is then the true heir of Zamunda, based on their laws, and so they set out to find him and bring him home and make him the king. Meanwhile, Akeem and his wife have 3 girls, and the oldest has been training to take over, even though she's not really allowed to, but she is basically set up as the next ruler, wants to be the next ruler. Wesley Snipes' character is a warlord from another country who has kind of been at odds with them for the whole time. And he actually plays the brother of the barking dog woman from the first movie, who also returns, which is great. The one thing about this movie I liked, just off the bat, was all the characters they got to return. They were actually the people. They didn't really replace anybody with anybody else. If they couldn't get them back, they just didn't bring them back. It was fun to see all these characters come back. It's not a perfect movie by any stretch, but I laughed a lot. I enjoyed it. I thought the performances were really good. I liked the story of the son. I thought that was a nice kind of relationship for them to kind of build on throughout the movie. It was fun to see Eddie kind of back as a lot of these characters. He brings back most of the characters that he played in the first movie, as does Arsenio Hall, and they throw in a couple new ones. It was just fun for me to see that. I want to talk about Wesley Snipes a little more, because I feel like between this and the Dolomite movie, like, he has put in some really good performances and people aren't really taking notice. And I think for some reason like his career was going okay before the tax thing, but then the tax thing happened and we kind of threw him aside and we kind of forgot about him for some reason. And Wesley Snipes, one of his best performances was when right before he went inside for the tax thing, he did Brooklyn's Finest with Ethan Hawke, which is a cop movie. And it was a really good movie that he did that he was in, but it kind of was not a huge blockbuster or anything. And then he went away for like 3 or 4 years. We forgot about him. And he's out. He's doing these great performances. He is fantastic in this movie. He's funny. He does the dancing is great. He's just a great character. His acting is on point in this movie. You could tell he was really having a good time. I guess it was fun. I saw a snippet of an interview, Wayne, where one of the dance sequences he was busy, so he couldn't be on set for the choreography. So he just had to show up and jump in the middle of it and just do it. And he's like, I had no idea what I was going to do, so I just started doing stuff, and it just worked. And he's like, so it's just kind of crazy how you could kind of have those moments sometimes in a big budget movie like this. Like we said, Amazon paid $125 million for this, so that's probably about what Paramount spent on it, would be my guess. I enjoyed the nostalgia to this film. I think a lot of people didn't. It seems to be kind of split between not just the critics and stuff, but people that we know that we follow on Facebook and stuff. I've seen a couple of my friends 2 thumbs down. And they said they had low expectations and they still didn't like it. I don't know. I enjoyed it. I laughed. I enjoyed myself. I thought it was fun.
Again, I think it comes back to, what generations are talking. Like, people in our generation, our age group, seem to be, for the most part, pretty receptive of it. Younger generations, people in their younger 30s and 20s, are really kind of critical of it because they didn't get it. It's like, well, have you seen the first one? Well, no. Well, okay, you don't need. I guess you don't necessarily need to see the first one. They explain enough of it in this to, not. This sequel doesn't need to depend on the first movie, but if you haven't seen the first one, then you're not going to get it, in my opinion. It's like, and again, I'm not trying to be critical of the younger generation, but it's like, I don't even know what the point I'm trying to make is. It's like, I don't get the criticisms and like the general disappointment with it. I mean, I laughed at all the appropriate.
Well, and some people are one of the people is older than us, so there are people from all sort of walks of life that dislike this movie to a certain extent. I just didn't. For me, I've always said this: comedies are always the easiest for me to judge because all you have to do is make me laugh. If you make me laugh, chances are I'm at least going to be like, hey, it was enjoyable. I may not say, oh my God, it's the greatest movie ever, which this one is definitely not, but it's an enjoyable film. I had a great time with it. My wife only saw about the last half hour of it, and she seemed to laugh and enjoy her way through it. And she doesn't normally like these type of movies either. It's just a lot of fun moments, a lot of great callbacks, a lot of great new scenes, a lot of great new characters. The fact that they were basically able to get everybody back was great. I love that they got the cameos of In Vogue and Salt and Pepper and Gladys Knight. Yes. And then the one towards the end who I'm drawing a blank on, but they got a bunch of other people just to show up in this movie. They got Louis Anderson to return.
Watson was back.
Yeah. yes, he was, and that was, I think, what everybody was waiting for at the end. It was just great. Tracy Morgan was great too. I love Tracy Morgan. I thought he did a great job as the uncle. Originally, when they were talking about making this, they actually wanted him to be the son, but then they realized that he was just too old, so they made him the uncle, which he did. Uncle Reem, he did a great job, and it was just fun to see the new characters interact with the old characters.
Uncle Reem and Semi going back and forth on CNN.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that was good. Oh, and Trevor Noah as the news anchor on CNN. Zamunda National News or whatever.
Yeah, I didn't make that connection to you just said it. Just I was like, okay.
Yep. So he was funny in that role too.
I'm happy with the direction that it went to, where they just there's a boy child now, so you can just move aside, oldest daughter, and let the man.
Yes,
take care of it.
Yes. It was it was very much a modern take on it, and I think. it was good to show where like the older generation kind of feels like, yeah, like men are in charge of shit, and to where the younger generation, we got to change with the times, and that's what this movie is about. I think it's probably no surprise, like, he's being forced to marry a woman just like his father. This is the Wesley Snipes' daughter, which, again, just like her aunt, very similar. Like, they come up to her like, what are you doing here? Well, my king told me to stand here until he gets back. It's been over an hour. And it's like, okay, like, that's something different. It's just, yeah, I don't know. It was just a really fun movie. I really liked the performances, like I talked about Wesley Snipes. And I think I don't know, I'd like to say if you like the first one, you should like this. But like I said, some of the people I follow on social media, one of them is my age and didn't like it. And another one is older than us and he didn't like it. And it just, I guess if you're going in and you're expecting it to be the original, it's not going to be that. It has a lot of callbacks to the original, but it is a little different. It is PG-13 too, so that makes it less, there's less bad words and stuff. I don't know. I felt the same way watching this one that I did to the original. And I just think that, again, it's like, these are like spoof movies. So you have to kind of like that spoof comedy, which is different than most other comedies. And it's very tongue-in-cheek. They're playing it to the audience. Everybody's in on the joke. We all know what's going on. We all know that these actors are playing these other characters. To me, it was great to have everybody back. I fall into the nostalgia category with a lot of these sequels, though. Same with Bill and Ted 3. There are a lot of people that didn't like that movie, which I'll never understand. For me...
They're wrong if you don't like Bill and Ted 3. You just... flat out wrong. I'm saying it right now. Line in the sand. You're wrong. There. Said it. Boom, go to the night.
There's a line in the sand, and you do not cross it. Yes, Bill and Ted is a classic. The third one, especially. All three of them. And I feel the same way with Coming to America. I guess that's what I'm getting at. I feel very similarly. I really like this movie a lot. I will rewatch it numerous times in the future. And I recommend checking it out. If you haven't seen it yet, it debuted on Amazon on Friday. I think a lot of people did see it because I had a hard time getting it to play. So I feel like everybody was trying to watch it all at the same time. Definitely worth your time, I think. Now watch it, judge for yourself. Everyone has their own opinions, and that's cool. Wayne, your final thoughts?
Yeah, it was great. I enjoyed it. It was everything that I expected it to be, and my expectations weren't that high. So, what were you expecting that didn't happen, or what was wrong with it? My favorite part is that they brought the elephant back. That's simple. And beginning of the movie, Prince Akeem is walking with King Jaffe through the front of the castle, and two baby elephants run by. And he's just like, hello, my friend. And there you go. And they bring them back with a full-grown elephant with a kid of his own, and they make that connection. It's beautiful, man. It's beautiful, man.
Should also mention, too, this one was written by the two original writers, but also Kenyon Barris, who is the creator of Blackish on ABC. So he had a hand in this one.
Fantastic show, Blackish.
Yeah, so definitely a lot of old and new working on this movie. Check it out on Amazon Prime right now. It's not going anywhere, so if you have Amazon Prime, you don't need to see it right now, but it is worth your time, I think. Just give it a watch. All right, so we're moving on into our awfully good or just plain awful segment. I tried to keep in the theme, if you will. And this is a movie that I never heard of before this week. And I searched it. I think I was trying to find, I don't know if I looked up bad 80s movies. I found it somehow through, Amazon. And it's called State Park. So there's not even a Wikipedia page for it. Came out in 1988, so the same year as Coming to America. A businessman plans to dump toxic waste in a state park, but it doesn't go according to plan. That's the synopsis, people. That's all you need to know. It's obviously trying to, late in the game, since it's 8 years after Caddyshack, it's trying to play off of Caddyshack's premise. Caddyshack's premise is that the rich people are ruining the golf course and it's going downhill and they want to save it. And similarly, you have, just like you have the, what's the dance? Why am I drawing the blank? You have,
Dancing?
Huh?
Dirty Dancing?
No, yeah, the is it a groundhog? What's in Caddyshack? What's the creature? Gopher. I couldn't remember Gopher. I couldn't remember the name Gopher right now.
Gopher, you idiot! The run for it!
Well, if I kill the golfers, sir, I think that would be pretty bad. The Gopher. They have this bear who is trying to sabotage the equipment of the people coming in to build the new buildings in the park and whatever. There's really no one famous in this movie. It, like I said, it steals its premise from Caddyshack, but it also is like all the other camp movies, like Meatballs and stuff that came out. It's these people, they're doing like this kind of like triathlon type thing, and they can win $5,000. So then you've got the metalheads, the two metalheads, which I thought were probably one of the better parts of the movie. You got the three girls who are, the three hot girls that are supposed to be like on their, just girls' weekend. And then you have, where are the other characters? Oh, the two Olympians who are like supposed to be disgraced Olympians, like siblings or friends or whatever, coming to win this competition. And you have the evil oil man who's dumping toxic waste into the park and is ruining the park for what it is. And they're forcing the sale from this brother, or from these two brothers, so they could take over all the land. It stars Kim Myers, Isabel Mejas, James Wilder, Jennifer Inch, Brian Dooley, Walter Massey, Christopher Bolton, Andrew Jackson, not the president. And that's about it. Oh, and it has the awful human being Ted Nugent in it for like 5 minutes. Before we all knew he was awful. So I could see watching this movie, Wayne, in the 80s and enjoying it for what it is. It's really dumb. It's a really dumb movie, but it fits into that, as we were talking about, that comedy element of the 80s. And it hits all those notes like it's supposed to. And it definitely feels like an 80s film. There were some moments that made me chuckle, for sure. The one I did like during the triathlon when everyone else was like involved with other shit, that the girl that joined it just for fun ends up winning the whole thing. I thought, because then she's like taking her sweet time through it, and she's like do 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 do, and I thought that element of it was very funny. There are lots of other funny moments throughout. There's some TNA and stuff, obviously, if you're into that kind of thing. Yes, it's a bad movie, but it's somewhat charming in its core, I would say. It definitely was written by people that saw other 80s movies, I think, and it was just like, hey, let's do that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything like super awful to say about this one, Wayne. I don't know how you felt about it, but it was fine, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's, definitely not awful. I won't go so far as to say it's awfully good. It's just a low-budget 80s film that kind of plays off of other genres and doesn't do it particularly well or particularly bad.
That's a good way to put it. It just exists. That's basically what we're saying about this movie. It like I said, it definitely plays off a lot of the 80s tropes. And, you have the the nerdy girl, the slutty girl, and the hard to get girl. Like all three of those are friends. I did think that like the haircuts making her horny bit was kind of funny at first. I was like, wait, what? Like this is the premise that we're going for? And I did like when her boyfriend showed up and there were a bunch of boys with his same haircut. I thought that was kind of funny.
But true, if boys or teenagers find out that a girl likes something, they're all going to replicate it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, it's just one of those movies. I don't know. Check it out if you like 80s comedies that you've never heard of, because like I had literally never heard of this movie. So yeah, it was an interesting watch. I did like the two metalhead guys. I thought they were funny. Yeah, I don't know. That's basically all I got.
Right on.
It was enjoyable. I'll say that. All right, so moving on to what I've watched this week. I really didn't watch a lot. I started rewatching Scrubs, which if you haven't watched Scrubs before, I'm a huge fan of Scrubs. I did watch over the last couple days.
No, I'm not going to give you mine, and no, don't want none of your time. Oh, not those Scrubs, okay.
Not TLC. The TV show Scrubs with Zach Braff. Let's see. I watched Boss Level the other night, which stars Frank Grillo, Mel Gibson, Naomi Watts, Michelle Yeoh. Also has Rob Gronkowski in it in his first movie role. Yes, he only has like a couple lines like later on in the movie. It took me almost the whole movie to realize it was him too. It's a fun movie. I like this movie. Boss Level, it's about a guy who wakes up one day and he's stuck inside the same day, and it's the day that he keeps dying. Every time he dies, he wakes up. Obviously, it is the groundhog genre. It's now become its own subgenre of films. There's been plenty of them that we've talked about over the last year since we've been doing this podcast. We reviewed another Hulu original, Palm Springs, which is another groundhog movie. Style movie, and this
throwback too.
Yep. So this is another one of those films. It's a lot of fun. It's definitely inspired by video games, like how the characters respawn. Wayne, like that's kind of how they treat it when he dies all the time.
Yeah.
And it's what I liked about it. Some of the elements I liked about it is they actually kind of keep track of how many times that he dies, which doesn't always happen in those movies. They kind of run out of time. They're just like, oh, it's been so many times now. So I like that aspect of it. It has some great action sequences. Grillo is really good at doing these kind of films. Joe Carnahan is the director. I've always been a big fan of his. Will Sasso from Mad TV has actually a pretty big role in this movie, which I really like him. So it was nice to see him kind of branch out. Something a little more serious, not as goofy. I mean, the movie itself is kind of goofy, but yeah, it was a fun movie. It's on Hulu right now. If you have Hulu, it was supposed to be theatrical, but due to COVID, Hulu ended up purchasing it. It may have just been a limited release anyway if it was going to come out, just because I don't know. Anyway, Mel Gibson's good as the villain. He's kind of getting comfortable playing these roles. He's been playing them probably for the last 10 years or so. He does a good job at that, and it's just lots of cool action sequences as well. The assassins that come after him are pretty fun. Naomi Watts, Michelle Yeoh, and Annabelle Wallis don't get a lot of screen time, which I thought was a little disappointing because they're like the three female leads. I didn't even realize it was Annabelle Wallis until like halfway through the movie. I was like, oh, that's who that is. There's this girl that he wakes up to every morning, and that's Annabelle Wallis, and you don't know who she comes into the story more later. So while we see her every day, we don't really know why she's there until later in the movie. But yeah, it's a fun movie. If you like you like action comedies, it's definitely something to check out. Lots of blood and mayhem because he dies a lot, And it's kind of fun to see him, you don't usually get to see the star of your movie die several times. It reminded me a lot of Edge of Tomorrow meets Groundhog Day. Like, that's just kind of the kind of Groundhog Day movie it was. But yeah, no, definitely check it out if you enjoy this type of films. The other one I watched last night was Below Zero on Netflix, directed by Luis Cuez. The only movie he did was Out of the Dark, which was like an American thriller. It reminds me, if you remember the movie Assault on Precinct 13, there's two of them. There's a John Carpenter version, and there's a 2005 version with Ethan Hawke. It reminded me of those movies. It's basically that premise, but in a prisoner transport bus. Someone wants to get in, but they can't get out, nor can they get in. So it's kind of like they have to figure out how to get inside, and they were trying to get out so they could survive. So it's a crazy premise. It's a lot of fun. It's a really good action flick. It is foreign. It's in Spanish with English subtitles, but it's only like an hour and 45 minutes. So it's a pretty quick watch. I liked it. I like that type of film. It really made me, I believe, both Assault on Precinct 13s are on HBO Max, so I think I'm going to go watch those this week because I really wanted to go back and revisit them after watching this. But yeah, fun movie. Check it out on Netflix called Below Zero. All right, Wayne, you got anything for this week?
No, it was a busy week for me. Nothing new. Chugging through Dexter still. I've got about 5 episodes left before the disappointment of the finale. I've been watching some Cold Case Files with the wife here and there. But yeah, hopefully I'll be able to pick up some and watch some new stuff this week.
All right. Sounds good. Let's see. I know you're busy, so it makes sense. All right. So news. The Ice Road, starring Liam Neeson, another action thriller, lands at Netflix. Chris Pratt and Constance Wu starring in thriller series for Amazon Prime. Melissa McCarthy and her husband joined Thor 4 as actors, with McCarthy playing a fake Hela, kind of like how they did in Thor Ragnarok, where Matt Damon and Luke Hemsworth played the fake Thor and Loki. So that'll be fun, I think. Silent Night, Deadly Night is getting another reboot. Hugh Grant and Sophia Lillis join the Dungeons & Dragons movie, already starring Chris Pine. The Twins, starring Teresa Palmer, will debut on Shudder. It starts filming on March 18th. Gore Verbinski, directing Sand Kings for Netflix, adapted from the George R.R. Martin book, or whatever he did there. Evans Ainsworth, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Cynthia Erivo, Keegan-Michael Key, and Lorraine Bracco join new Pinocchio remake for Disney, starring Tom Hanks and Luke Evans. Rennie Harlan, returning to horror with The Refuge. Party Down revival happening at Starz. Japanese anime Hellsing getting film adaptation from Amazon and John Wick writer. And one of my favorite news of the week, Devon Sawa joining the Chucky TV series, which is going to be hitting Sci-Fi, and he's going to be the main character. Not obviously Chucky, but one of the main characters on the new show. I like Devon Sawa. I follow him on Twitter. He's a great follow. But obviously from Final Destination and Idle Hands and several other movies. So I'm looking forward to that. Obviously Jennifer Tilly also returning. Also in the news is we're going to talk a little bit about the whole Dr. Seuss stuff that's been going on. People pulling his books and people coming out to defend. Also the Mr. Potato Head stuff, which everyone's overreacting about, of course. These things are stuff that we see with movies and stuff all the time too. People reacting about racism and things that are 30 years old. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay to look at our past and go, you know what, guys? These 4 Dr. Seuss books right here shouldn't be on the shelves anymore.
Yeah. I jumped in with that one. I didn't know. I think it was your post that brought it to my attention. I'm like, really, Dr. Seuss? I had to go check it out. I'm like, yeah, we don't need to be reading that to children anymore, guys. You know, let's just realize, hey, times have changed. We've become more. We've woken the F up. Really, it's like, wow, we probably shouldn't say that thing. Probably should describe people that way. No big deal. Yeah. Green eggs and ham. Still a book you can share with your kids. Calm down.
There's still again. It was only like 4 that they were removing. Yeah. And like I said in my just as an adult reading those books to kids, I always feel like I thought they were smarter than they were when I was younger, but I was a kid. And now like I read them and I'm like, oh, these are just kind of goofy books to read to kids. And they're fun, but that's about it. They use a lot of fake words, which you shouldn't want your kids to learn because they're not real. They're mainly for entertainment value. And if you have books, again, that were written in the past and have lots of racist stuff in them, just remove those books. You have to remove all the books, remove some of them. Or the ones that have that stuff in it. And that's fine. And society will go on. And if you still own those old books and you, for some reason, cherish those books, you could still have those books. You could probably still find them somewhere. They'll probably be more expensive now since I believe the Dr. Seuss, like the company, have pulled the books from their selling them. Right. But these things happen. You go back and you look at, like we were talking about during the 80s movies, there's a lot of problematic issues with the 80s movies we talked about, some of the ones that we didn't talk about. There's a lot of problems with old Muppet shows. They're now putting disclaimers in front of the Disney Plus Muppet shows if they contain racist caricatures of people from back in those times when they weren't... I mean, we should have known better, but they didn't, or they didn't care. And I can't say because I wasn't around back then, but in a lot of those old shows, they have very racist things in them. And people are upset that they're putting those disclaimers in there, but I think it's really to get upset over nothing, because there's nothing wrong with telling people that there's insensitive things inside what you're about to watch. It's no different than putting in the opening where it says, rated R for strong language, extreme sexuality, and racism. Maybe add that to the thing now.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you know what? If a group of people that are being depicted by this character tell you you're offended, why are you getting mad?
Exactly.
Like that's my thing. It's like, oh, well, stop being so sensitive. It's like, no. Shut up and listen. That's all I'm saying.
Right, exactly. And that's what it comes down to.
This is a trigger topic for me, and I'm not even going to go down there.
And my last comment on this will be that Mr. Potato Head shouldn't have a gender because potatoes don't have genders because they're not real, people. Well, they're real, but they're not talk. They don't talk. You know what I mean? Shut up. God. Anyway, moving on. All right, movies and TV shows.
My childhood.
How will I know the difference between Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head? You took all the parts off of them anyway. Neither one of them had a penis or a vagina. It didn't matter, people.
It's a football. Come on.
Exactly. A football that hurt. All right. Movies coming out soon. Jupiter's Legacy series starring Josh Duhamel and Leslie Bibb hits May 7th on Netflix. It's the first Netflix adaptation of a Mark Miller property since he signed that deal with them. There hasn't been a lot on this. They just released the first photos. I'm excited for anytime there's a superhero type thing that's going to come to Netflix or Amazon. I'm excited for it. Mark Miller stuff's usually pretty violent, so I'm expecting it to be, on par. Thunder Force superhero comedy with Melissa McCarthy and Octavia Spencer hits Netflix April 9th. City of Lies, the long overdue Johnny Depp Forrest Whitaker film centered around the police department who investigated Biggie Smalls' death, finally being released on March 19th in theaters and April 9th on demand. Now, this movie, a little history, was supposed to come out 3 years ago in 2018. The studio went under or bankrupt or whatever. And then as soon as that happened, then the Johnny Depp abuse allegations started with Amber Heard. So then no one wanted to touch the movie after the studio collapsed. So it's just been sitting on a shelf. I feel like someone probably just thought it was a good time. Like, hey, it's the pandemic. There's no new movies. It looks like it's supposed to be a good movie. It's from a good director. Has two great leads in Depp and Whitaker. It is not necessarily about Biggie Smalls, so I don't want people to be confused and think they're going to watch a Biggie Smalls mystery murder movie. What it is the department that, it's based on a book about a true story, the department that investigated the Biggie Smalls murder was apparently a very corrupt police department. And Johnny Depp's character, he plays the guy who found that corruption and exposed them for it. So that's what the movie's about. It uses the Biggie Smalls murder, I think, to kind of have a focus, but it's really about police corruption, which is something I think that, today with everything that's going on in police and society, we can probably relate to. So anyway, just remember too, anything that Wayne and I say or just what Wayne and I are saying, we're not speaking for anybody else but ourselves. Thank you for listening to us babble on this episode. I feel like I kind of lost focus here and there, but that's okay. That's what we do. We kind of ramble on here.
You know, I go in 5 different directions and lose my train of thought and focus every show. So
yes. So it's just, there's just so many movies to talk about that a lot of times you're right. Like I'm trying to pull from over here and I'm trying to pull from over there. I'm trying to remember what I wanted to talk about, what I wanted to stay focused on. So again, thank you for listening to the ramblings of a crazy man and his sidekick. We appreciate it every week. And Wayne doesn't mind being called my sidekick because he does it all the time. So don't at me, you bastards.
Batman, sir.
All right, you can follow us at Now Showing with Mike and Wayne on Facebook and Instagram, and now_Wayne on Twitter. Email us at nowshowingwithmikeandwayne@gmail.com. Personal, you can find me at We Are Screwed 2 on Twitter, at Mike1830 on Instagram, at Michael Kirkpatrick on Facebook. Wayne, you can find at Wayne Yerke on Twitter and Facebook, at Wayne_Yerke on Instagram. Find us on Entertainment Buffet's YouTube page. Watch all their stuff. Lots of good stuff on there. Lots of good podcasts to listen to. We're up there. For Wayne Yerke, I am Mike Kirkpatrick. Thank you for listening to Now Showing with Mike and Wayne.